very outside chance to sneak into the 12-team field. A lot of chaos would have had to happen. I think that point is now rendered moot as they've taken a second loss. I think it's over for the Cougs. Would have loved to have seen Wazoo hang around with what happened to them and being sort of marooned in the artist formerly known as the Pac-12. Don't know what we're calling it now, even though the official name is the Pac-12. Now they're in the Pac-2. But yes, very, very bad loss to New Mexico over the weekend. Can't have it, can't afford it, yet they took it. Not good.
Not good at all. I don't think they were going to be in the dance no matter what, just because of their conference and all of that has happened in the offseason. But perhaps someday they will be back in the conversation. The conversation continues here as we continue to get you set for the third set of CFP rankings. Who's in, who's out? You can expect Georgia to hear its name in the top 12. Coming up here on CBS Sports HQ, keep it locked. Georgia keeping its playoff hopes alive. Carson Beck playing mistake-free football against Tennessee, and they win 31-17. Beck finished with 3 total touchdowns, considering he had multiple turnovers in 4 straight games coming in. Georgia's now won 8 straight meetings against Tennessee, each by 14 or more points. Style points matter. Here's head coach Kirby Smart when asked what the committee looks for.
I don't know what they're looking for. I really don't. I wish they could really define the criteria. I wish they could do the eyeball test where they come down here and look at the people we're playing against and look at them. And, you know, you can't see that stuff on a TV. And so I don't know what they look for, but that's for somebody else to decide. I'm worried about our team.
Well, you know who came down there and had the eyeball test? Josh Pate. We welcome him in now. And Josh, you were in Athens when Georgia beat Tennessee last week. What do you make of Kirby's comments? Because you had your eyeballs on that game.
Yeah, well, it felt like, if you didn't know, it felt like a game that it was two top 10 teams. It was played at a really high level. It was intense. It was ultra physical. I think Kirby was prepared to say a lot of things if they happened to have lost the game. And they were going to be a 3-loss team, but they were still going to have these games against top 15 competition. And I think he just had all that stuff bottled up, and then they won. And then someone asked him about the playoff, and it was like shaking up a Coke bottle and turning the cap, and he just goes off. He's not saying anything different than a lot of other people have said, both coaches and players and people in our line of work. But I think what he did do is now, instead of just wanting to maybe make a case to be in that thing, I think now Georgia moves to the position of we want to make a case to maybe host one of these home playoff games.
Josh, I think we're going to get our answer about what they think about the eye test depending on what's going to happen to Indiana this weekend. So we're not going to have the answer after these rankings, but we will next week depending on what happens in the shoe. There's your answer about how much they factor in the eye test, what they think about the eye test, because Indiana's resume outside of Ohio State, there's nothing on it. It is the 106th ranked strength of schedule in college football. When you add Ohio State to it, which they will in a few days, it jumps to 45, Hakeem. So yes, we will see how much that eye test matters when we get around to Indiana.
All right, well, we will see what ends up happening that. You could make the case for 5 or 6 SEC teams to make the CFP. And Josh, I have a diagram here that I'm going to make the case right now. Week 5, Alabama beat Georgia. Week 8, Tennessee beat Alabama. Week 11, Ole Miss beat Georgia. Week 12, Georgia beat Tennessee. And in Week 14, if Texas beats Texas A&M, how are you not putting 5 teams into the playoff from the SEC?
Almost ran out of fingers. My answer is I'm not.
5.
I'm not making the argument. I'm putting them in.
Yep.
I had verbal warfare with Cannell earlier today because he thinks that is insane. He thinks 4 is the max. There is no max, first off. I mean, I got to know what the rest of the field looks like. But if all of this chalk largely plays out and Texas doesn't lose to A&M, which would be a whole new can of worms we would have to open. If that were to happen, Hakeem, and I've only got one ACC, and I've only got one Big 12, and I got a G5, and I'm going to assume Notre Dame. I would put 3 Big 10, I'd put 5 SEC. I think the big point of contention goes right back to what Richard just said. If Indiana loses Saturday, and it's not 49-10 or anything like that, if they lose a relatively competitive game, how far does the committee drop them? We see, like, in the last few seconds, they dropped Brigham Young 8 spots from being undefeated down to 14th. Okay, so if Indiana loses to Ohio State, how far do they drop? If they don't drop far enough, then I'm not getting 5 SEC teams in there because they have sent a message loud and clear that Indiana's probably still got themselves a spot there, which I personally have trouble wrapping my arms around that concept because unlike some of these other teams, absent the Ohio State game, as Richard said, there is nothing there. But I'll tell you what there is there. There's a Big Ten sticker there. It used to be when we talked about teams like this, it was Boise. It was like a G5 team because there's such an anomaly on the strength of schedule for Big Ten Indiana this year that we're talking about them in the same vein we used to talk about like G5 teams. So does that Big Ten sticker carry a little added weight that formerly the little guy never had?
Where I disagree with Josh about that scenario is Tennessee. I look at Tennessee, and I got a side eye with those Tennessee Vols. Yes, the win over Alabama will be a great win, but other than that, they don't have a ton. Got beat by 2 scores against Georgia, and that Arkansas loss also happened. That's a bad loss, I think, for Tennessee, for a team trying to get into the playoff as an at-large. So as far as getting a 5th SEC team in, I don't necessarily think Tennessee gets in. I don't put Tennessee in my bracket in the scenario where you have Texas winning out and not taking the loss to Texas A&M, which, look, we're going to have 10 shows about the college football playoff if Texas takes a loss to Texas A&M.
Yeah, but you're going to have those folks from Tennessee saying, well, we beat Alabama, and you put Alabama in the field. they're going to have that conversation. That's going to be there. It's going to be a legit conversation. And if Tennessee goes to Nashville and beats Vanderbilt, a team that Alabama lost to, another common opponent. Tennessee fans are going to be, I mean, they're coming with forks and pickets and all, with everything.
Alabama would have stuff to fall back on that would be a win over Georgia and a win over South Carolina. Remember, I said earlier in the show, South Carolina's ranking and South Carolina moving up in the rankings looms large. Missouri also, they blanked Missouri, and for some reason, the college football playoff has a love affair with Missouri. We haven't shown you the rankings yet, but they've got a love affair with Missouri. So Missouri happens to be a good win for Alabama. I don't think it is, but they do. So it matters. And then you would have what Alabama would do, Josh, in the SEC championship game.
Well, we're not going to sit here and pretend like the rankings aren't coming out. You're watching them alongside us, perhaps. And Colorado only moving up one spot. What do you make of that? They go up to 16 here.
Winning in. Handle business. Colorado is in a perfect spot right now to handle business. But hey, guess what? Colorado doesn't really have anything on this resume either, if you really want to parse it for an at-large consideration. Colorado has a loss to Nebraska. Nebraska might not go to a bowl game. It's a horrible loss. So, okay, Colorado may win the league. Absolutely. They very well could. But I don't think they're winning on Saturday. We're picking that game later in the show. I don't think they're going to beat Kansas. So Colorado is playing their best football right now, but Colorado does have a resume that is not so great, in my opinion.
Yeah, Richard, the other thing to pay attention to here is, so I agree with you, but the other thing to pay attention to is Colorado's placement relative to Boise. If we just, for argument's sake, project those two to be conference championship game winners, then we're looking at a situation where the way everyone penciled in that top four and those auto buys in August gets flipped on its ear, and I got Boise there with the number 4 seed or a number 3 seed. So independent of, you know, whether they could get an at-large bid, I think you and I and everyone else both or all three agree that they're not getting an at-large bid. Can they somehow vault themselves up to where they are a higher ranked potential conference champ than a Boise? That to me is becoming one of the unforeseen biggest storylines of this whole thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously got to get past Kansas on Saturday, and then we'll see who they get in the Big 12 championship game, because again, they beat Arizona State per se, or say they beat Arizona State in the Big 12 championship game. That becomes a great win for Colorado, quite frankly, because Arizona State will probably still be ranked by the time that Big 12 championship game comes around.
All right, much more ahead here. The CFP rankings slowly coming out here. We are going to have reaction to the entire field and the projected bracket. Who's in and who's out? Next on CBS Sports HQ. The third set of college football playoff rankings have been released, and here's a look at the projected bracket. A reminder, the top 5 conference champions earn automatic bids, with the 4 highest ranked teams receiving a first-round bye. So Boise State is ranked 12th. BYU is ranked 14th. But in the bracket, again, the 4 highest ranked teams receive a first-round bye. That's how this works. 11 games to be played, culminating with the national championship in Atlanta. From the top to the bottom here on the projected playoff bracket is BYU going to Columbus to take on Ohio State. Alabama and Notre Dame. We saw that a couple years ago. That didn't go real well for Notre Dame. Georgia and Penn State. That'd be a fun matchup. And Ole Miss and Indiana in Bloomington. A first-round matchup there for the Hoosiers and Rebels. All right, back here with CBS Sports college football writer Richard Johnson. Let's welcome in 24/7 Sports college football analyst Brad Crawford. And Richard, I'll go your way first. Your initial takeaway is what from the rankings?
My initial takeaway is further down than a lot of people are going to be paying attention to, because a lot of people are going to be paying attention to the top 12, top 15. I understand why. But Missouri sitting there at 23 is beyond the pale to me. This is a team that got beat by a combined 60 points, over 60 points, by Texas A&M and Alabama, and then they lost to South Carolina on Saturday. It matters because Missouri is propping up the college football playoff cases of Alabama and Texas A&M in edgewise ways, because Missouri counts as a ranked victory for those 2 teams, and ranked victories are something that the committee has in their stated criteria on the website, something that they put a lot of importance in. I cannot understand why week after week after week this Missouri team remains in the top 25.
That's a big bone for you to pick here.
It is,
man. You keep harping on this.
It is, Hakeem. I bring it up every single week because it matters when we start to try to parse these teams at the end, because the way we're going to be parsing these teams that are sitting in the 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 range, it's going to be parsing them because of some of these edgewise cases, like a win over Missouri that is boosting a resume that shouldn't be.
With all due respect, Brad, that's not my initial takeaway, okay? And I like Richard, but that's not my. I don't care about Missouri right now. And I love Tiger fans, and I love Missouri. It's a great state, and it's a great program. Shouts to Eli Drinkwitz. But my biggest takeaway here is we've got 5 SEC teams in the top 11.
Pretty impressive, right? I mean, Tennessee might be on the outside looking in, but right now the Vols look decent if they went out and finished 10-2. I'm most surprised that Ole Miss right now moved up to what, number 9? That's really impressive.
Yep.
The Rebels had an open date, and now they're 9th. So, yeah, a tough game out Florida this weekend. Ole Miss right now, though, with Lane Kiffin sitting pretty good in that 9 spot. I do think we're going to see some fluctuation after this week.
So 5 SEC teams in the top 11. I want to stay right here because Brad and I talked about this on Saturday after Week 12 was final. Brad, we have a situation here where those 5 teams are in the playoff when all is said and done, because perhaps the committee thinks a 2-loss SEC team is better than a 1-loss Indiana team if they were to lose to Ohio State.
Or potentially Penn State if Indiana loses in overtime or some kind of crazy, last-second finish. We're going to have a situation, Hakeem, where it is a 10-2, maybe Tennessee, 10-2 Georgia, 10-2 Ole Miss, going up against an 11-1 Indiana or an 11-1 Penn State. And we're going to see a situation where you either have 3 Big Ten and 5 SECs, or we have 4-4. I think it's more likely we're going to have 4-4. There's going to be a 10-win SEC team sitting home. Man, these next couple weekends, and especially Conference Championship weekend, are going to be pivotal over these next few polls.
So how can you argue that then, Richard? Make the case against that.
Against?
Yeah, against 5 SEC teams in.
Well, my thing is first and foremost, with Tennessee. I don't love what Tennessee has on the page right now.
Beat
Tennessee
Alabama.
Got a good win against Alabama. All right. You got a horrible loss against Arkansas, and you have
They could beat Vanderbilt.
And you have a 2-possession
They have Vanderbilt
loss
on the end of the schedule.
And if they beat Vanderbilt,
who did Vanderbilt beat? Vanderbilt beat Alabama.
Sure, but if you
can't have Alabama in and Tennessee out.
Hakeem, if you beat Vanderbilt, then Vanderbilt's got, 5 losses? And Vanderbilt's doesn't even have a prayer to being ranked. So
Common opponents we're talking about.
Vanderbilt does not get to boost your resume if Vanderbilt's sitting there at 5 losses, at 6 losses on the edge of bowl criteria. To me, that does not boost Tennessee's resume. So I look at that. Now, Indiana's got to take care of business on Saturday, all right? And by taking care of business, I don't even mean necessarily win. Indiana has to be competitive in that game. If Ohio State covers a spread that is creeping towards 2 touchdowns, if they cover that or exceed that, I think Indiana's going to have a problem because Indiana does not have anything else on their resume to fall back on. Outside of the Ohio State game that they play on Saturday, Hakeem, Indiana's strength of schedule is 106th in the country. They have nothing on that schedule. Nothing. So
they beat Michigan. That's their best win.
And they struggled to do it. Michigan punked them in the second half of that game. And the reason, or the fact that Michigan punked them in the second half of that game and made it very difficult on Indiana to win, quite frankly, is why I'm pretty worried about Indiana on Saturday against Ohio State. Indiana has to acquit themselves well in that Ohio State game. Indiana has done the first thing that good teams do, which is beat bad teams. And they got a whole host of bad teams on that schedule. But the other thing that good teams do is they beat other good teams. So you have to play really well against this Ohio State team.
Brad,
don't give them an excuse.
Brad, to Richard's point, is there a score threshold? Like, does Indiana have to keep it within 2 touchdowns? Or heck, if they win outright, then this conversation is moot. But my point is, does Indiana have to keep it within 2 touchdowns to have that argument really sink in?
I mean, I think a 38-20 loss, even if the Hoosiers do not cover, and it's somewhat competitive, 11-1 is going to get Indiana in. This is a record-setting season. I think the committee is sort of taking that into consideration. Game control has been a positive for Indiana. They've blown out most opponents. I want to touch on one thing, too, the Tennessee-Bama situation. The reason right now the committee is not looking at Tennessee's win over Bama as sort of the outlier there is because the committee likes Bama more than Tennessee right now. And head-to-head only matters when everything else is equal. Well, the committee does not see those 2 teams equal right now, despite the Vols beating the Crimson Tide. Alabama has that win over Georgia. They beat South Carolina. That's a quality win Tennessee does not have. And Tennessee has a bad loss at Arkansas. Another 2-loss SEC team, Ole Miss, scored 63 points in Fayetteville. So Tennessee also, right now, even though they're inside the top 12, ain't looking too good for the Vols.
I'm sorry about that, Brad. Indiana also doesn't necessarily own that top 5 spot because we've seen what happens when you take a loss. The committee just punted for a week, punted Georgia out of their spot, and they were, what, 2 or 3 in the country when they went into Oxford and lost to Ole Miss.
Correct.
They were last week on the outside looking in. Now they're back because they beat Tennessee. But again, this is not a hard and fast thing that they belong in this 12-team field. If they lose against Ohio State, the committee has shown that they'll knock you out. They'll kick you out.
Well, BYU was 6 last week. Yeah. They're all the way down to 14. They dropped 8 spots.
Yeah.
So to me, that tells you that they don't believe in BYU. And we sat up here on this very desk and we said we didn't believe in BYU. And it's not because we don't like the program or we don't like the players or we don't like the head coach. We just don't believe them being a top-tier team. Like, I have a ton of respect for BYU. But I had people chattering and all in the comments up and down about how BYU wasn't getting enough respect. BYU had a chance to get more respect at home against Kansas. It did not. It did not. They got that win against rival Utah. They're down. That tells you right there, to me, Brad, what the committee thinks of Indiana. When you talk about this conversation involving Indiana, they're still there. They're still 5 in the country.
That's because the committee respects teams without a loss. Unblemished records mean everything to this committee. But once you lose a game, if you don't have a good resume, you get jacked outside of the top 10 quickly, man. And that's what we saw with BYU. We saw BYU in those first rankings, number 9, maybe underrated a bit. Then they moved to 6. But now they've been properly rated outside of the top 12 after that loss, as you mentioned. So it's obvious, man, that the Big 12 is going to be a one-bid league. And we have mentioned that situation where the top, 5 highest-rated conference champions get auto bids. What if the Big 12's not inside that top 15?
Then they're in trouble. But I don't think that's going to be the case because right now, for the sake of this conversation, this exercise, BYU is in. They're the 12 seed. They're taking on Ohio State. So if you're sitting here, we can sit here and argue about how good BYU is or what that loss meant. If they take care of business against Arizona State and then Houston, they're going to be in. And if they can beat Colorado, they're in. But the problem lies in, can they beat Colorado? Can they beat ASU? That's a big question. Can they beat Houston? Yeah, sure. Why not? My thing is here, it's going to come down to that conference title game. If they both win out, saying Colorado and BYU, who do you got in that game? Because to me, you could go either way there, and that team's getting in.
The thing I think we also need to point out is what Brad just said. Unblemished records matter.
Yes, they do.
A team that you haven't brought up sits in these college football playoff rankings. It is the Army Black Knights. If Army can remain undefeated, it would mean they've beaten Notre Dame.
Correct. And Notre Dame would be
in
out
a few days
Yep.
in Yankee Stadium. That would be a tremendous win for Army. So if it comes down to, for that 5th automatic qualifier spot, Boise State, who wins out, Army, who wins out, and then the Big 12 champion, I am not so sure the Big 12 champion gets in. I don't even think I'd put them in my field if I were drawing the field. I think you give those
I disagree with you there, but I can respect that. I disagree.
Because Army would also have beaten Tulane
Agreed.
in an AAC championship.
But I think that when all is said and done, when there's Selection Sunday, Brad, I think the Big 12 champion will be in the playoff field. I don't really think that I know there's a scenario, but based on what I have seen, based on what you have seen, I think that you're probably starting to believe that Colorado and BYU, those are two very good those are quality teams, and if that one of the team that wins the Big 12, they got to put them in the field. You got to put them in the field.
I can't imagine the college football gods allowing, Coach Prime to win a Big 12 championship his first season in the Big 12 and not get in on like a 7-game winning streak entering the playoff. I do like what Richard said though, and we saw tonight Tulane is up 5 spots.
Yep.
We didn't think they'd jump 5 spots after shutting out Navy, but here they are. So that's going to be 2 quality wins for Army if they're able to Yankee Stadium, beat Notre Dame, and then beat Tulane in the AAC championship game. So, yeah, I mean, I don't think it's a shoe-in that Colorado BYU winner is going to be in. But if it is Colorado and BYU, say, loses to Arizona State and still somehow backs its way in, I don't know, man.
You can't leave the Big 12
champion out. There's no guarantee right now.
You can't leave the Big 12 champion out.
Why not?
Because you can't. Not when there's 12 teams in a playoff.
Why not?
You can't.
You don't have a blood.
No.
You do not.
I don't see the committee going, we're going to leave the Big 12 out in our first year of the expanded playoff.
You do not
This is an amazing conference.
To the college football
Colorado's
playoff.
resume won't be as good as Army.
Colorado's resume will not be as good as
Army getting in. I'm fine with Army getting in. I'm rooting for Army. I hope Army has absolute chaos on Saturday at Yankee Stadium.
But Boise's resume is better than Colorado. If you stack Boise up,
you're not wrong.
Next to Colorado,
I won't disagree with you.
They're going to leave them out. They're going to leave them out.
I can't see how a Big 12 champion would be left out.
Just because you call it a Power 4 conference in name does not mean they have a blood right to get in this dance. It does not matter what your average resume with your average payout with your TV deal is as far as how you stack up as a conference to get in this dance. Now, it would be a hell of a promo that Coach Prime would cut. Talk about it. We would have to have Coach Prime on because Coach Prime, I don't even know, he would burn the whole thing down.
So you're telling
if they let them out of the playoff.
Brad, you're telling me that 1 year after Florida State doesn't get in, after going undefeated, that a former Florida State standout, Deion Sanders, wins the Big 12 and he's not in the playoff? Get out. I can't see that.
I think it helps, too, that Travis Hunter is going to win the Heisman.
There you see?
You want to have the Heisman winner in this playoff,
But what if it's BYU that wins it? Hold on. What if BYU wins the Big 12 title game? Are you keeping them out in your scenario?
BYU wins out?
Yes,
the Big 12
wins out. They win their final 3 games.
That's when it gets dicey. If BYU wins out, I think you're going to have a hard time parsing between, again, undefeated.
Because Kansas is playing like South Carolina is right now.
Right.
They're upset-minded. They're playing the way we thought they were going to play at the beginning of the season.
Remember what you'd have to parse. You would have to parse an undefeated Army that would have a resume that includes a win over Tulane and Notre Dame against Boise State and then against your Big 12 champion. I don't know, man.
We're not going to have an undefeated team be left out of the playoff. We expanded this thing to get more unbeatens in. An unbeaten team is not getting left out.
I agree with him.
Yeah.
I agree with him.
I do. I agree with you guys. Can you imagine, though, if Army beats Notre Dame? Have you played that scenario out in your mind yet, Richard?
Oh, it would have to be the perfect Army day. I'm talking about 6 possessions per side. The thing's already in Yankee Stadium. It's going to look like a game from 1940 whatever. So just make this the most retrograde, set the sport back 50 years, 0 passes, and Army finds a way to get it done in Yankee Stadium, just like the Four Horsemen did way back when. It would be something.
I love Jeff Monken's program, what he does with these young men, and look, they're a fun team to watch. Bryson Daly, I mean, he should be in the Heisman conversation, no question. But Notre Dame, Brad, right now, if you ask me a couple teams you don't want to face right now, it's Notre Dame. Week in and week out, they are forcing multiple turnovers. Like, they're nasty on defense. They found their groove.
Elite secondary, yeah. I mean, I think the game plan for Army should be just what Richard said. I mean, you have a 18-play, 9-minute drive. Then maybe an onside kick, and Notre Dame doesn't get the ball for an entire quarter. You're trying to limit possessions. I think Monken's going to pull out all the stops, man. But I'm with you. Notre Dame, as a first-round home game team at 11-1, it's going to be a tough out because Riley Leonard's playing really well. He's healthy. Running game solid right now.
I want to be clear. I think Notre Dame's going to win that game.
That's fine.
I think Notre Dame's going to beat them pretty soundly. But just like Brad is saying, with the way that Army will pull out all the stops, they're going to go for it on 4th down. You saw the fake field goal that they had a couple weeks ago. Like, they're going to do what they can to make it just a junk ball afternoon for Notre Dame. Notre Dame better strap it up.
Just a couple of 12-minute clock-draining drives for Army, right? Like that, they've done that. They've done that this season just a couple weeks ago. They're a team that can certainly do that. I love the chaos. I'm here for the chaos. Look, if we've made the argument for SEC teams, for 5 SEC teams, how good they are, but maybe the committee has SEC fatigue. Maybe we want to get some new programs in the playoff. Maybe we want to see some new blood. Maybe that's what their criteria is, because you heard Kirby Smart. It's like, I don't know what they're looking for.
When they expanded this thing, it was clear, they made it clear that this was about participation. It was about increasing participation across college football. So let's see. I do think a 12-team rankings logic is different than a 4-teams ranking logic. We'll see what happens in a couple of weeks when we get to the end of this marathon.
Fun conversation. That was a really fun conversation. This will continue throughout Selection Sunday. Brad Crawford, Richard Johnson here on CBS Sports HQ with our initial takeaways. Coming up, the biggest winners and losers from the latest college football playoff rankings next on CBS Sports HQ. The third set of college football playoff rankings have been released. Here's a look at the projected bracket. A reminder, the top 5 conference champions will earn automatic bids, with the 4 highest ranked teams receiving a first-round bye. And Boise State now getting a first-round bye, ranked higher than projected Big 12 champion BYU. BYU 14th in the rankings. Boise State is 12th. So BYU would visit Ohio State in the first round. Alabama and Notre Dame, they just met in the Rose Bowl a few years ago. Georgia and Penn State in Happy Valley. Look at this. 3 Big Ten teams with home games. Indiana hosting Ole Miss in Bloomington. Welcome in CBS Sports college football writer Richard Johnson and 24/7 Sports college football analyst Brad Crawford here to talk winners and losers. Richard, I'll start with you. Your biggest winner from the third set of CFP rankings is who?
My biggest winner is Tennessee, because Tennessee's still hanging around in that top 12. We've talked about it during this show. I don't have Tennessee personally in my top 12 when all is said and done in a scenario where you're trying to talk me in to 5 SEC teams getting in. If Texas wins out, Georgia wins out, Bama wins out, and Ole Miss wins out, I think the 4 of them go, and I would not have Tennessee in that specific circumstance. So the committee's currently telling you that they value Tennessee quite highly. And so I think because of that, Tennessee's a big winner.
The committee also loves Alabama right now.
Yeah, they do.
That's my big winner. 3 spots after beating Mercer, partly because 2 teams ahead of Bama lost. But this is a great scenario for Bama, guys, because we didn't think a 3-loss SEC team could get in. Bama could foreseeably go to Atlanta, lose to Texas, and get in at 10-3, because right now at number 7, they've got some spots they can fall if they're competitive against Texas and lose in Atlanta. So even though Lane Kiffin said that right now no SEC team really wants to play in the championship game because of a possible 3rd loss, I think Bama's sitting pretty that we could see the first ever 3-loss team get in.
See, the risk, though, of getting a bye is huge. What's a bigger deal? 3 losses or the bye?
I think people are really overlooking the bye week aspect.
Huge.
The bye week aspect of things, where if you don't get a bye and you have to play, but you lost your conference championship game, you may be playing a team coming off of a bye. You may be playing a team that didn't go to its conference championship game where you did. Therefore, you've played 6, 7, 8 straight weeks of football, and you're getting a team fresh. Yeah, it's a home game, but you're getting a team fresh. The bye is such a massive deal, and I think a lot of people are just kind of poo-pooing.
I think you guys both just gave your winner, and they're both from the SEC. 5 teams in the top 11 here in the latest rankings. Tennessee and Alabama. Look, if one of those teams is left out, one fan base is going to be, you know what. I mean, they are going to be irate, especially if they say, well, hey, we had 2 losses. Indiana lost. They didn't play anybody. Like, that's what the conversation will be from those fan bases. They'll say, this 12-team playoff, it didn't even prove it. It didn't prove anything. That's what they'll say.
Well, Brad, it ain't going to be the fan bases either. It ain't going to be just the fan bases.
Well, you know what I'm saying.
It's going to be a certain conference office in Birmingham, Alabama, that's going to have a very serious issue if that happens. Brad knows exactly what I'm talking about. I think the SEC, Commissioner Greg Sankey, and their apparatus, they're going to go nuclear if that happens.
Well, we'll wait to see. We will wait to see, Brad. All right, Brad, your biggest loser from the latest CFP rankings is who?
And BYU falling to 14. I was kind of surprised that they dropped that far after the committee corrected its ranking on the Cougars last week. But you can't lose at home like that, man. And it's a bad loss for BYU. They still control their own destiny. We have talked about previous segment that maybe the Big 12 championship game, BYU can still get there, win it, and get in the playoff. But now there is no margin for error for the Cougars. They have to win out. Got to beat Colorado in a couple of weeks if the Buffs keep winning. But number 14 this week, that's not a great look for Kalani Sitake.
I agree with Brad. BYU, my biggest loser as well. Frankly, I think they're pretty adequately rated where they ended up falling. I had some serious questions about BYU. I picked them on this set to lose to Kansas, and then they did last week. So I agree with Brad. Biggest loser this week. The committee has shown what they have, and coming home, it ain't easy. Arizona State this week, and then that Houston team that everybody sort of forgot about, that Houston team will get you. because it's the Big 12, and all these games in the Big 12 are like within a field goal spread. I mean,
yeah, a lot of
Colorado's got the
one-possession
same
games.
thing with Kansas. All of these, and when you get in one-possession games, you don't know what can happen. One week, you get a miracle defensive holding call that helps you get the win. Another week, a pooch punt bounces off your return team, and you lose the game.
BYU had been 4-0 in one-possession games. They lost their first one-possession game and their first loss of the season as they lose to Kansas, falling some 8 spots in this week's rankings. But they're still in the field, okay? The Cougars are still in the field. Jake Retzlaff still in the field with the BYU Cougars, so don't be hating on them too much. Our winners and losers, Brad Crawford, Richard Johnson. And right now, Ohio State is the favorite to win the national championship. 8 titles in school history. Their last was in 2014, the first year of the college football playoff. Just like college basketball, we're on bubble watch in college football. Indiana looking to beat Ohio State for the first time since 1988. Can they cover the spread? Next on CBS Sports HQ. Bubble watch in college football. Here's a look at the notable games in Week 13. Monster game in Columbus. Ohio State has won 29 straight meetings versus Indiana. Last loss, 1988. Ole Miss off a bye visiting Florida. Rebels are double-digit favorites at the Swamp. Colorado taking on upset-minded Kansas. Jayhawks just beat BYU. And Notre Dame clashing with undefeated Army at Yankee Stadium. Here with CBS Sports college football writer Richard Johnson, and let's welcome in two-time Super Bowl champ Bryant McFadden, also a former Florida State standout, here to break down the big games in Week 13. Start in Columbus, where Ohio State is a 12.5-point favorite. Hoosiers haven't beaten the Buckeyes since 1988, but Indiana's 6-1 against the spread in their last 7 road games against Ohio State. BMAC, in terms of the spread, is the trend our friend?
Yeah, I'm following the trend in terms of the Hoosiers. They've been outstanding. Granted, you look at their schedule, it hasn't been extremely difficult. Their most impressive win, I think, has been against Michigan. But outside of that, they can score points. They get timely stops on the defensive side. And they have a quarterback who's not afraid to sling it around the yard. So to your point, you look at this line and the Hoosiers receiving 12.5. I got to pay to see it, guys. I got to pay to see it. You know what I mean? And, you know, who knows, a backdoor cover is something that we all love. As long as the cover happens, I can easily see a backdoor cover as well. But don't sleep on Indiana. Do not sleep on Indiana, because their offense has been prolific. They play with a lot of confidence, and they have some dudes on the offensive side that can do some damage when they get the football in their hands. So me personally, I'm following the trend, Hakeem. Give me the Hoosiers getting 12.5.
BMAC, my brother, I'm sleeping, I'm snoring. I got sleep apnea as far as it's concerned about Indiana against Ohio State. A couple years ago, if you'll remember, a Michigan State team that a lot of people thought was really good beat Michigan, took a loss to Purdue, but they went into Ohio State. And you know what Ohio State did with them? It was a weight class game. It was, we're Ohio State and you're not. And I fear that that may be what we're looking at happening in this game. I think Ohio State, primarily because of what I saw in the second half for Indiana in the trenches against Michigan. Indiana was pretty unable to move the ball in that game. Yes, they won, but I think that's a significant indicator that Ohio State can be better than Michigan was in the trenches against Indiana and control the game, win the game, and cover 12.5.
Indiana plus 385 on the money line, if you want a little sprinkle there to see if they can absolutely pull off the upset and beat Ohio State. We'll see about that. Ole Miss coming off a bye. Last game they beat Georgia, visiting Florida this week, where the Rebels are double-digit favorites. The Gators are 3-0 against the spread when DJ Lagway starts versus FBS teams. Richard, who's starting this week for Florida?
That'd be one Derek Lagway Jr. And because he's starting, I will be taking the Gators to cover in this spot. I think that Florida's offensive line is one of the most unheralded offensive lines in the SEC, and I think they'll be able to hold up enough against what Ole Miss has up front. Ole Miss is very formidable up front with their players, Prince Emmanuel, Walter Nolan, J.J. Pegues. What they have up front on the defensive line is very, very formidable. But I think Florida should be able to hit enough big plays to at least keep pace. The hook. The hook is my friend here when I talk about Florida covering the spread.
And you know what? If the hook is your friend, it's my friend as well. And I'm okay in buying maybe a half point up, maybe buying it to 11. But to your point, Rich, I'm taking the Gators as well. And it's hard for me to say that, being a no, but it's my job to give you unbiased analysis. And most importantly, try to put money in your pocket. I believe the Florida Gators are playing some expired football. They're playing with a lot of confidence. To your point, DJ Lagway, he's acclimated to this QB1 role for the Gators offense, and they're at home. They are at home. I would feel totally differently. I would feel differently if this game was in Ole Miss, but they're at home. They're in the swamp. So that means something in terms of them covering this spread. I don't expect Florida to do anything money line wise. I wouldn't sprinkle anything on this money line, but in terms of covering this spread, yes, give me the Gators as well. Until my point earlier, if you want to buy it up a half point to get it to 11.5, I'm okay with that. But I do believe Florida will have enough to cover this 10.5.
Yeah, if you're curious, Florida plus 280 on the money line. Not really enough value there on a sprinkle. In the 3:30 Eastern window, Colorado plays upset-minded Kansas at Arrowhead in Kansas City. The Jayhawks just beat BYU. The Buffs cannot afford another loss. Colorado's a short 2.5-point favorite. Richard, you know that I like Colorado as of late. I've jumped on the Buffs bandwagon. Who do you like in this spot?
Hakeem, I sat next to you, my friend, on this desk last week, and I took Kansas to at least put a dent in the playoff dreams of BYU. I'm sitting on this desk right next to you this week, and I'm taking Kansas to put a serious dent in the college football playoff chances of Colorado. I think Kansas wins this game outright. Jalen Daniels has stopped giving the ball to the other team. They didn't even play that well on offense, to be honest with you, against BYU, and they were able to get it done. I think Kansas can win this game. What they have with Jalen Daniels playing his best football right now, Devin Neal at running back, Jayhawks win it outright, B-Mac. You heard it here first, my friend.
Look at that face.
I got that little baby face when you give the baby some baby food and don't taste good, and you're like, ooh,
yeah, like the peas.
Rich, I didn't like
when you get the peas, they don't like the peas.
No.
Give them the sweet potatoes.
Kansas over one of the hotter teams in college football, led by two high-level NFL prospects offensively, and Shedeur Sanders and Travis Hunter. Do you believe Rock Chalk Jayhawk will have enough to keep pace with the Buffaloes on the offensive side? No way, Jose. Give me Colorado. They will not be denied. They will not allow Kansas to put a dent in their Big 12 title hopes. This will be a speed bump-like game for Colorado, but this is a residential speed bump. It's one of those speed bumps where you see it and you kind of just go over it. You see it, but you don't really slow down. That's what I see happening in this ball game, because what they did last week against Utah's defense, one of the more respected defenses in the Big 12, they had no answer in slowing down those high-level prospects at their skill positions for Colorado. So, Rich, I'm sorry. That baby food you just gave us in terms of analysis, it didn't taste good. Give me Colorado.
Do you know what Dion is going to say to his kids? He's going to look them in the face, and he's going to say, men, this is an NFL stadium. You have a chance to play here one day. We're at the home of Patrick Mahomes. Travis Kelce plays here. He's going to look at Shedeur. He's going to go, son, you want to be a top draft pick? You better perform today against Kansas. Travis Hunter, you're going to go #1 overall. Show them what an NFL player looks like in college. You are going to win the Heisman. This is the day that you will win it, right here against Kansas. I'm not messing around here. Give me Colorado. I'm with B-Mac. Give me Colorado.
Everybody believes.
Well,
everybody believes.
You know, that's fine. Hey, I'm jumping on the bandwagon. Okay, so if we get tripped up and we hit a rock, then fine, we hit a rock. I'm going with them.
And I can tell you this much. This will be Travis Hunter's Heisman moment.
Had one last week.
This will be his moment that he solidifies the award. If he puts forth the effort, like we believe he can on this stage, to kind of get them into that safe spot for a Big 12 title, book it. Hit the polls.
There we go.
Way.
He did it last week. One of the most anticipated games on the schedule takes us to Yankee Stadium. Notre Dame against undefeated Army. The Fighting Irish, 14.5-point favorite. B-Mac, this feels disrespectful. 14.5?
Yeah, it is. I'm scared of this line, guys. I'm honest. This line is confusing to me. Bryson Daly is healthy, right?
Yep.
Like, we haven't heard anything, any illness or off the field issues. He's going to participate. So with that being said, I got to take Army. I'm taking Army because their offense has been high-powered. And the thing I like about Army, they can throw the football when need be. Bryson Daly is like their Taysom Hill for their offense. And we just saw what Taysom Hill did to the Cleveland Browns. No pun intended, Hakeem, but I just had to use him as an example.
Hey,
because
I'm good. It's fine.
Bryson Daly plays the quarterback position. But, hey, Rich, give me Army getting the points. It's 14.5. I really feel comfortable in Army getting this, being able to cover this spread, getting 14, because I love their offense. And they have a little bit balance, a little more balance than what we've seen in years past in terms of throwing the ball.
B-Mac, we're simpatico here, my brother. I am also taking Army. The hook. We talk about the hook. The way Army is able to control the pace of games, the tempo of games, 6 drives apiece maybe in this game, they're going to take the air out of the ball. They're going to hold it all afternoon if you give them the chance. Because of that, I'm taking Army to cover the spread. They're going to go for it on 4th down. They may have a fake field goal, may have a fake punt in this game. They're going to go for 2, you'd imagine, in this game, try to maximize their advantage whenever they can, press their advantage. Give me the Black Knights to cover in this game.
Their last touchdown drive of their last game against North Texas, 21 plays, 94 yards, 13 minutes, 54 seconds. They will drain the clock. They could do it against Notre Dame. And you're going to give me 14.5 points? Give them to me.
Hook is your friend.
Give them to me. Let's recap the picks from B-Mac and Richard. On opposite sides here in Columbus, both in agreement on Florida. They both agree with Alabama laying 13.5 in Norman. Both agree with Army, and they're split on Kansas and Colorado, the bubble games in Week 13. Coming up, a full bracket breakdown. Bryant McFadden is back, here to fill out his bracket, and you got to see who he's got winning it all. Next on CBS Sports HQ.
More changes for the Jets, and this time it comes at the top. Owner Woody Johnson announced on Tuesday that the team has fired general manager Joe Douglas. The Jets are off to a disappointing 3-8 start in a season that began with major expectation. Douglas has been the Jets GM since 2019 and was in the final year of his contract. For more on this story, here's CBS Sports lead NFL insider Jonathan Jones.
So the Jets did what was inevitable, firing Joe Douglas. We all knew that he was not going to be back in 2025. He was on the last year of his contract this season, obviously a very disappointing one for the Jets. Owner Woody Johnson said this is the best roster in his quarter century of Jets ownership, yet these are the results. So Joe Douglas no longer with the Jets. Who are they going to hire? Look, it depends on who is actually going to be running the day-to-day there. Woody Johnson may not be there. He served as